An impactful run defender and pass rusher that's only 21 years old, but is seemingly ready to translate to the NFL. JT Tuimoloau is one of the more interesting edge rushers that could be going a little bit under the radar in this year's draft. So let's get right into it. So yes, today we're going to be discussing the other edge rusher on Ohio State, not Jack Sawyer, but JT Tuimoloau. Now, if I keep saying that last name, probably going to mess it up. I probably already did, and I don't even realize it. So we're just going to rock with JT for the rest of the video. I appreciate that the first name is just JT. I don't want to call him the other edge rusher. That sounds bad. Doesn't sound great. Okay, I don't want to do that. But JT to me is a fascinating prospect for this year's draft. I don't think the production is outstanding. You look at the 12% pass rush win rate, but the 7.8% run stop rate is really good. He also put together a fantastic stretch throughout the college football playoffs, 6.5 sacks through those 4 games. Very high note. But JT's in a very interesting spot because while he's a younger prospect for this year's draft, he gives me the vibe that he could step in and be impactful immediately. Now, there may be some upside limitations of how far can he actually go as a pass rusher and as a run defender, but I don't doubt that year one, he could be a starter that could impact for a team, both as a run defender and as a pass rusher. It's just about how far can you get with that ceiling. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. Let's, of course, start off with that first step explosion. Now, this is one of the weirder areas for me to grade for JT because I think there's elements here that I like. There is quickness. You'll especially see this laterally down the line of scrimmage. You'll see this working over the tight end when he's kind of in a 6 technique or even he's in a stand-up press roll over a tight end. His ability to work laterally down the line of scrimmage, the reactiveness in those spots, he can kind of cut off those wide zone blocks on the backside. It's awesome to see that kind of footwork, and you'll even see some flashes of that change of direction when he can work laterally, then plan to get back upfield. You'll see some of the change of direction flash in those spots. There's good quickness out of his stance, out of that 3-point stance. He plays with his hand in the dirt a ton for Ohio State into striding upfield, working upfield. Very quick and sudden movement. That being said, though, the issues that I have is I don't feel like it's super reactive in terms of the timing. You don't feel like you get a lot of early jumps off the ball that's going to put offensive tackles in really bad spots. The stride depth that he covers, a huge threat on an offensive tackle immediately off the ball. I don't feel that when he's working upfield. Like that short area quickness that he'll showcase, and you can see this when he kind of moves laterally. It's like he's gliding out into space. You'll see this working down the line of scrimmage, which definitely translate well. And you'll actually see, I think, a lot more of the explosion on entry as a pass rusher. And I wrote this down that if an offensive tackle is kind of just sitting back and waiting for it to happen, he's going to get blown up at the point of attack. And that's what he's capable of doing. We saw that against Texas in the playoffs. Just a nasty bull rush turned into a long arm move on the inside shoulder. And the explosion that he created at the point of attack was super noticeable that he's capable of getting there. I just don't feel like in that first step in general off the ball, it shines. So I went with a slightly above average grade here for JT, but it could be an area that has a little bit more to tap into. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to be something that's really going to excite teams or you're going to feel that presence consistently throughout the first step off the ball. But things that translate well here as well, the closing path to the quarterback. This will show him more as a path rusher, but just the path that he takes to get to the quarterback is very consistent. Plays with really nice vision, kind of cuts himself off at the top of the rush. As a stunt rusher, you'll see him kind of work through traffic, find a way to get himself towards the quarterback on the play. He also, I think, does a nice job. You see it as a tackler. I think he's a great tackler. It's actually one of my highest graded categories for JT. I think he's a great rangy tackler. The length shows up here, nearly 34-inch arms at 6'4", 265 pounds. I mean, that's the build of a run defender and a pass rusher that has some juice to his game. That range in space shows up. It shows up in pursuit. He does a nice job of keeping himself in the play. These tight angles that he could play with in pursuit made him play a lot faster in terms of that closing ability. But even on a play like this, you would see, and he made a lot of good plays like this, but just kind of guessing at the mesh point, not really breaking down. So it can lead to great plays. It can also lead to things like this. It'll also show up in working over gaps, the ability to kind of just get his hands on ball carriers from one gap to another when he's squared up on the play, or even you'll see this as a pocket collapser, that ability to just kind of get a hand inside, disrupt passing lanes. He attacks passing lanes. You go back a couple of years, he had a couple of interceptions, 4 pass breakups on the season. So he's utilized that length to be impactful as well. Now, I don't think his change in direction in space is fantastic. I don't love him dropping into coverage all the time. I don't think that's his best asset, but he definitely uses his length here pretty darn well. So for me, slightly above average in terms of the first step explosion. In terms of play strength, I really like this. Very good grade here for me in terms of his play strength. Again, some things don't always show up consistently in terms of the play strength. Like I think his explosion on entry, especially against the run, can be inconsistent specifically. But then you'll see kind of just the way that he's built. He's filled out through his frame. You see it in the lower body. He's got a real thick lower body at the point of attack, which is incredibly beneficial. He's also pretty strong in terms of the chest punch that he can deliver and the way that he kind of transitions speed to power, or really just power from the ground through his upper body. It's a jolting punch that he can deliver at the point of attack. That's super noticeable when he lands it cleanly, especially as a pass rusher. And he's got those hips. He's got the hips to kind of roll through contact, to roll through blocks, create a little bit of a lockout. And that's where you really start to feel a lot of the force within his game. He can create some downhill leverage, which opens up true speed to power, true bull rush opportunities for him. And that's when you'll really see the power that he can play with and the play strength that he can bring to the table. Kind of sets up throughout the rep. I mean, as reps go on, you'll see him kind of work through a long arm move, and you'll see the leverage that he can create and the power through the lower body. I think that he has a lot of upside here in terms of play strength. The initial force can be very noticeable. You'll see it when he's working over guards. I mean, there's multiple examples of him just putting a guard on their back with some of that force that he creates really through the ground, but also through the upper body that he can create into contact, kind of just launch himself and jolt himself into contact. Now, for me, I just think there's inconsistencies here. There's inconsistencies with the walk back that he creates.
We'll talk about this later, but in terms of the explosion and urgency into contact or showing violence, I don't always feel like that pops off the screen into entry points, which limits some of that play
Trying
strength.
to create some of that leg drive, even resetting in bull rush opportunities doesn't always feel that noticeable, and always in a good spot to actually create an anchor. Number one, he doesn't create a lot of bend, so downhill blocks, you'll get dry blocks that can kind of push him out of play a little bit, let him play beyond the line of scrimmage, which isn't great. He's not always playing behind the line of scrimmage against downhill blocks specifically, or he doesn't get his feet set quick enough, and then as an edge setter, you'll kind of get to see him pushed off the spot a little bit. It's not always as heavy of an anchor at the point of attack you would expect for a guy at his build. Some of that to me shows up to some of the foot quickness, the inability to reset. So I don't feel like it's always on display, but ultimately I think he has very good play strength. And as a pass rusher, I think he's a plus pass rusher. I think he's slightly above average to a good pass rusher right now. And this is a weird spot because as I wrote it down, I think he's one of these guys that is pretty clear cut. You can see when he's going to win. You can see when he's not going to win. And unfortunately, that's going to open up. He has to have a lot more counters. You have to find a way to get a second effort pass rush strung together more consistently, because right now I think it's very straightforward. He's either going to win and potentially affect the quarterback, or it'll be like a late sack because he stays in the play in his length, or he's just going to lose, and the rep will stall out way too early as a pass rusher. I love the angles that he takes as a pass rusher. I love the way that he presses the offensive tackles right off the ball, how he squeezes the line of scrimmage, and he works through that really well. He is very reactive to offensive tackle sets very quickly, like how can I play off of this? Can I get to my spin move? Which is one of the, kind of little nuanced moves that he has. It doesn't always find to be the most agile. He kind of ends up on the ground too much there, but he's so lengthy that he still finds a way to get to the quarterback. But he's got a little spin move that he'll kind of throw in and see if he's reading that offensive tackle set, right? Depending on how they're playing, he can open it up. Now, I don't think I saw enough just pure inside moves, pure crossover moves, maybe Euro step to just go win inside when a tackle sets that direction.
I think part of the issue is he doesn't consistently create oversets from offensive tackles because of his get off, but we also did see plays like this with an inline tight end, which gives support, but also then notice like more of an inside set from the tackle and the way he takes advantage. He really creates kind of that top man opportunity, gets that outside shoulder and cuts off the top of the pass rush opportunity here, flattens the edge a little bit. You see how well he transitions here through the ankles to really flatten the edge and maintain speed as he's turning the corner.
But he's very quick to react. He plays angles really well. He opens up long arm opportunities, opens up opportunities around the arc to kind of get half man and also just kind of work under pads, squeeze airspace. He also does a nice job with his shoulders where he's difficult to get a clean punch on. That first punch is tough for offensive tackles to get a clean shot. They're usually having to work around his body to make that happen, which makes him a little bit slippery on that initial entry point for offensive linemen. His hands and his feet really well as a pass rusher. The club moves, the skip moves, the two-handed swipes, everything gets timed really well. And that doesn't mean it's always going to work, but it gets timed really well with his footwork. Those things are dialed in really well at this point, which could lead to some concern that he wasn't even more productive with that being the case. But I think a lot of that also comes back to some of the limitations athletically, which we're going to touch on, but also that there's not a lot of counter to his game. Like, for example, I don't think he has the speed around the arc to just be a threat. Not only is that first step quickness off the ball, but it's also just as the rep rolls along. He doesn't seem to gain speed. There's not like a second gear that he taps into. What I like is that he can maintain speed through contact balance. This is huge. He can work his hands, continue to gain ground, continue to gain depth, and that allows him to flatten the edge better than you would expect, to get half-man opportunities and win more than you would expect. But ultimately, he doesn't have some of that juice around the edge. This doesn't pop as much when you're watching him. You also don't see some of the true bend within his game. I see this at the top of the rush, but I specifically see it within some of the dip when he's trying to split gaps or create some slither as an interior rusher. Maybe he's crashing on stunts. You don't feel some of that slither. You don't feel much dip in his game. Everything feels kind of upright as a pass rusher in those spots. Now, he could drop his weight and create leverage from speed to power, but you don't feel as much just looseness within his game. He doesn't feel as slippery constantly as a pass rusher. So feel a ton of shake or wiggle within his game as a pass rusher, and I don't think that he always shows the most twitch and kind of that suddenness when you have either short sets, guys are getting up on him quickly, or specifically you'll get some longer offensive tackles. We saw this against Penn State where he would get stalled out very early. I didn't think he always showed some of that just twitch or some of the shake, suddenness to kind of work around some of those spots. Step depth in front of him, and it would stall out the rep. He didn't get enough of those just true inside wins, some of that agility to kind of shake and work inside. I think his agility right now is average at best. And I also like the fact that he stays square to the line of scrimmage. You'll see this on kind of slide protection. You'll see this when quarterbacks are working downfield. You'll see this in pursuit. He does a great job of staying square. He's always prepared for the next guy. When someone, okay, he's bounced from this block to the next, he gets his hands, he shoots him inside, and he bounces off guys. He's not trying to avoid contact. He initiates, but he continues to work through contact really well. That contact balance, I think, will translate to just consistency of being a little bit more of a pocket collapser at the next level. Those things will translate, I think, to the next level. He finds the quarterback late consistently. I also do think he has a little bit of ankle flexion, like a little bit of ankle bend, a little bit of ankle strength specifically, which can allow him to open up some run-to-pass opportunities. It's not elite here, but it's definitely capable, and it is more than I expected, especially at the top of the rush. Remember, this was the #1 high school recruit when he initially joined Ohio State in the nation. So this was a player that had a lot of expectations. He was like the highest signing that they had in years at Ohio State. See an improved plan for kind of jump sets to beating guys that get on him a little bit quicker, and then also the agility aspect. I don't love a lot of this year. The lateral ground that I think he covers is limited. I think the club move, there's just limited ground that he covers in these spots. So even if he connects well, finds a break point, which he's pretty darn good at, it doesn't always create the distance that I think he needs to. And his body control here can become a little bit of an issue when he starts to really kind of lean his force through his upper body. He kind of pushes it over he kind of rolls it over his pads, and that's when you'll see like chop down attempts from offensive linemen. You can see him just kind of fall unbalanced if he doesn't connect. So he's got that jolting power, but he leans on it a lot. So the unfortunate part of that is offensive tackle plays it well. They can be putting on the ground a lot. Like the opportunities to find speed to power angles into entry and find success there as well. I just wish he was a little bit lighter on his toes. So I think he's a slightly above average to a good pass rusher. I just worry about what the ceiling is here. Now, in terms of just being able to shed blocks, get off blocks, I'm actually a little bit lower than I think most people are in this category. Again, slightly above average to good in this category for me. Couple of issues. One, I don't think he has some of the recovery lateral quickness. I'll see this entering into blocks or resetting down into blocks. Maybe if he gets sealed off on the block, if it's a pinned down block, can he work over top? I don't feel like there's some of that quickness there. He also can enter too upright to me as well. Some of just a true sink doesn't show up. It throws off his anchor. I do like how he attacks hinge blocks. It's very consistent. He plays with really nice posture into entry there. Guys are trying to hinge him, kind of turn him around the corner. He's very consistent with his entry. He's also really fast going back to some of the first step into entry. He gets his hands on you really quickly, kind of beats you to your spot. Gives core strength to kind of continue to work through offensive linemen on the play, just keep battling. But I don't feel like he has some of the twitch and the shake to kind of make offensive linemen miss or just be as slippery as you would like to see in just terms of the true shed ability. The take on for me for pullers and for split zones aren't as consistent in terms of actually making a play. It's more just kind of taking on the block. It doesn't feel like he has some of the range to actually make plays on the ball when he gets those kind of blocks thrown at him directly, which I assume teams will try to do early and fall behind the scheme a little bit. That's another issue. And now I don't think it's overly noticeable because he has the movement skills to get on top of things, but I think just recognizing the scheme and where it's trying to work ultimately and trying to be more proactive could be an improvement in his game down the road. And then finally, hand usage. Okay, one of the best grades we'll talk about here. It's very good for me with this hand use. I think he does a lot well here. The length doesn't always show as well as it is. Like, he has good length, but it doesn't always showcase on the field, which is a problem. And you'll see that early on plays. But ultimately, there's a lot of good here. He's got an accurate entry as touched on and kind of that jolt that he gets to. I don't feel like his hands always show to be super heavy either. While he does have so clearly some of that upper body punching power, they don't always showcase to be as heavy as they're capable. I think there's kind of a buildup to it, the way he converts it. It's not just the ability to kind of just stand there and punch and move guys around or create an initial knockback. I think it's kind of more of a buildup, which leads to more inconsistencies and just true knockback power to his game. Fast to reset his hands inside as a pass rusher. He's fast to reset to different blocks as a pass rusher specifically. He finds breakpoints incredibly well, elbows, wrists. He finds breakpoints really well. He's consistent to finding inside strikes because of the way that he squares up blocks consistently. He just needs a counter move. He needs to add more counters. When he gets latched, it feels like that's kind of it. He'll find like breakpoints as he's working through the play, and I do like that, how we can create initial punch and then work his opposite hands. His hands don't stop working. They're active. The problem is he doesn't always find really any kind of counter that's that successful once he gets latched early, outside of just kind of working his way slowly to the quarterback over the play without actually creating a clear disengagement. That's more as a pass rusher, but he's ready with his hands. He gives his hands at a good level on entry. He could be a little bit high at times initially, and the problem there is I don't think he always gets himself back down because he doesn't reset that lower body base, but typically that leads to more consistency early, because if it's not, he's going to put himself in some really bad spots. It's just not the most complex always as a pass rusher. It's a little bit more straightforward with the moves. There's not as much dynamicism to what he's going to. It's a little bit more straightforward with the plans. Overall, I think J.T. Tuimoloau is very interesting because I think he's going to be productive year one for whoever drafts him. I think his ceiling is end of round one. I think he's probably going to be a day 2 pick. I think that the critical factors could play in his favor. Teams could view him as he has that explosiveness in his game. They could also like him a little more as a pass rusher than I do. And I know that his play strength is there. Teams could fall in love with that and potentially push him up with his length, his build, the way that he makes impacts and everything. Run, pass, not just as a pass rusher, but also in the passing game, getting his hands on footballs. Like, there's a lot of reasons to believe that this could actually get to a spot where people don't expect it, but he could go a lot higher than you expect. But ultimately, he feels more day two to me. I ended up with my final grade here, as you can see, at a 6.305. He's sitting in right next to Jordan Birch. I think that's a fair spot, but two very different. Birch, you're trying to figure out what it can turn into. I wonder a little bit about the ceiling for JT, but I think he'll make an immediate impact. So two very different types of players there that kind of settle in right next to each other. With that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.